CorelDRAW Tips and Tricks with Steve Spence. Today's session, Creating Vertical Text. Brought to you by Conde Systems. Vertical text is easy. It must be. It says so right here. Seriously, vertical text is easy to do if you know the secret, the last step that makes it work. Let's take a piece of vertical text and create something new. We'll take our cursor out here and we'll begin a vertical line of text. This seems so simplistic, but here goes. V, return. E, return. R, return. T, return. I, return. C, return. A, return. L, return. And because we want a space between words, an extra return. T, return. E, return. X, return. and T, return. That's all there is to it. That's simple text. Now, there are a couple of fonts out there that you can chase down if you really want to, but this is vertical text, and you can do it with any font. You can do it on the fly, and you don't have to clutter up your font file with vertical fonts that you'll probably only use once in a lifetime. But if you look at this vertical line of text, you'll see that there's something wrong with it. It just doesn't look quite right. The eye picks it up, but sometimes the brain can't quite function on it to figure out what it is. Well, here's what it is. Let's select it. We'll go up here to the horizontal alignment, and we'll tell the text to center. It's as simple as that. Now the text looks like it should. Centering the text, so far as CorelDRAW is concerned, causes each letter to really behave like an entire line of text. Now, we can still do all the things with that text that we could normally do. For instance, if we want to compress the text, we can, same way we would anything else. Now, of course, that compresses the letters as well as the spaces below. If we look at this particular font, it's really pretty close to what it should be as far as spacing is concerned. Spacing between the letters, called leading, should be about 25% of the height of a letter. So maybe this is just a little bit stretched more than it should be, but we can fix that easily. We're going to go to our shape tool, and when we click on our shape tool, you'll see the little buttons pop up, one on each side of the letters. This one doesn't do anything. You can't select it because that's a return. This one, however, allows you to do whatever you want to with that letter. At the bottom, we have some arrows, and these arrows, just like it would be if it were a text or on anything, would allow you to put more space between the letters, and you can see that doesn't work because there's only one letter per line. But this one allows us to change the leading, the space between the letters, to make it whatever we want it to be. Some fonts come in and they just look terrible. They have way too much space between the letters, or in some cases, not nearly enough. So this is the tool that allows you to change the leading on that line of vertical text. It doesn't change the size of the letter, but it does change the amount of space between them. All right, let's look at a couple of other vertical text examples. This one, for instance, uses Times Roman. You can see that it's really not as easy to read as this Arial font is, and that's because the eye is struggling with these serifs. Anything that makes the letter look more complex causes the eye to take more time to process it. So when working with vertical text, if at all possible, stick with very simple text like Arial, or in this case, rounded Arial. Here we show an example of a fancy text which would look really cool if it were on a horizontal line, but put in this situation, you can hardly figure out what it says. If you didn't know it said vertical text, you'd have to really stop and look at it. Is that a 1 or an I? What are these characters? And your brain has to put those characters together pretty much one at a time. So not a very good choice. Here's another choice. This is called Stencil Font, sometimes called rubber stamp font. And although it's fairly fancy, it allows the eye to pick up the letters easily. And that's kind of ironic since this has serifs on it, just like the Times Roman did. But for some reason, this one's much easier for the eye to pick up. That may be just my eye as well, so it may vary from person to person. So if something looks good to you, then it's right. If something looks good to your customer, you know it's right. Here's another example. This one uses Italic Text. It uses Arial, which is easy to read, but it's been italicized, and as you can see, adding the italics makes it much more difficult to read. Not impossible, but much more difficult. Here's one that I can't read at all. If I didn't know what it said, I couldn't pick out vertical. I would have to look at the letters one at a time and put them together in my head. This is Arial text, but it uses upper and lower case. I won't say there's a rule about it, but at least around my shop, if we do vertical text, I can't think of a single example when we ever used upper and lower. We always use uppercase text. Finally, there's this example. This is Brush Script, one of the most popular and, by the way, most overused fonts in our library. It can be used in horizontal text to accent, to give a little style, a little movement, but when it's used in vertical text, it's just terrible. V-E-R-T, is that a T or a 7? I, is that a 7? If this isn't a 7, maybe that one is. You get the idea. The characters are just not distinct enough to really let us identify them subconsciously. We have to think about them and put them together with the font. And we don't want to make things difficult for the reader. We're trying to make things easier. Now let's go back over to our first example, this one that's in the box. It has 2 lines of text. What in the world is that about? Well, let's take the text out and see what it really is. Is that done using some magical formula? No. Let's ungroup it and take another look. This is just 2 lines of vertical text grouped together. That's all it is. If you try to make vertical text like this, for instance, you're just going to have a nightmare. It's much easier if you need to do multiple lines of vertical text to do them as individual lines and then just position them the way you want them and group them together. Simple. Multiple lines of vertical text are typically fairly difficult to read. In this particular case, I think it does okay. I think we could get by with vertical text as easy. but in most situations, especially if there's more than 2 lines of vertical text, it really is just too difficult for the eye to figure out. The objective of doing graphics with text is not to confuse the eye, but for the eye to be able to pick up the text subconsciously and process it without even thinking. And with vertical text, it becomes a bit more challenging since we're taught to read left to right, not up and down. Where would you use vertical text? Well, here's an example. This is a name badge, and this is for Champus Hospital. It's fictitious, of course, but in this vertical badge, which doesn't give us a lot of space to really work, we can use a line of vertical text which not only tells what hospital it is or organization, but also adds an element of design. We have up here, of course, the hole that the lanyard clips to, and then maybe a photograph and the person's name and perhaps their ID number or the department they work in, etc. So in a case like this, it really is okay to use vertical text. Anyone that looks at that pretty much can figure it out, and everyone's going to have the same thing on their badge. So it's easy to read, and when they're looking at this, they're probably going to be in Champus Hospital anyway, so they kind of know where they are. But vertical text has to be used sparingly. If we were to take the name, for instance, and make that vertical text, and I'll just go in and put in the returns to make that happen. And then we will center it, although those letters happen to center automatically. That's just goofy. It just wouldn't be used that way. We always fall back to the left to right rules of reading text. But in the case of Champus Hospital, or if this were some other organization, that might add a nice element of design as well as communicate some information. So that's pretty much it for vertical text. Vertical text is easy to do. You may not use it very often, but there will be times when a customer comes in and says, oh, I want this to go vertically, or you're designing something and you're just looking for some kind of design element to give it a little snazz, and you go to vertical text. So at least this way you'll know how to do it, and also in the back of your mind you'll have some rules about what kind of font you can use. Should it have serifs or not have serifs? What if you need multiple lines? You'll kind of know the rules of the road when you have to use vertical text. That's it for this session. Thanks for watching.